Good morning, everyone. Global News is reporting, this is the headline, without recent escalations, Iran plane crash victims would be home with their families, says Trudeau. First, my question is, how do you know how an alternate history would play out? If only Neville Chamberlain hadn't accepted the Munich Agreement, right? And we'll get there. Because I'm going to show you how appeasement worked out. But first, here's the Global article. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that 57 Canadians killed when Iran shot down Ukrainian International Airlines Flight 752 would be alive if not for recent escalations in tensions in the region. Trudeau spoke with Global National's Donna Friesen on Monday about the Canadian response to the plane crash and the ongoing work happening to support the families, identify the victims, and hold Iran to account in the investigation into how the missile that took down the plane was fired. Scroll down. If there was no tension, there was no escalation recently in the region, those Canadians would be right now home with their families, said Trudeau. Now I'm going to pause again, just quickly. Yesterday I reported that Iran was shooting their own citizens for protesting the Iranian government shooting down the Ukrainian plane. Now, would you like to blame Trump for those deaths too? Is it Trump's fault because he bombed Soleimani, the general of the terrorist Quds force? Is that, it's really, really funny. We're going to go back and we're going to look at a history of Iranian aggression against the United States. So is this really Trump's fault? It just seems like you have to really pick and choose, right? Kind of like the climate change thing. If you choose a date, say in 1975, and then choose a graph, say the man hockey stick graph, well, slam dunk. You've made your case, right? And if you choose an aggressor, in this case, Donald Trump, and choose a victim, in this case also, Iran, well, slam dunk, right? You can make your case, I guess. It just seems really, if you broaden your scope, if you look at the reality of this situation and not just say orange man bad, Trump man bad, how dare he do that? You see some truths that aren't being reported. So, here we go. This is a Justin Trudeau quote. Quote, back to the article. This is something that happens when you have conflict and war. Innocents bear the brunt of it, and it's a reminder why all of us need to work so hard on de-escalation, moving forward to reduce tensions and find a pathway that doesn't involve further conflict and killing. All of us being Iran, right? Right? Like all of us with Iran. They need to stop doing what they're doing, and then all of us can move on with our lives and the rest of the world. Back to the article. His comments come... not back to the article yet. I don't think that Justin Trudeau means that when he says all of us, though. I don't think he's talking about Iran. I think he's saying all of us like Donald Trump. He needs to get on board here. Let's give them lots of money. We'll get there. Back to this. Work so hard, de-escalation, conflict and killing. His comments come ahead of a meeting being hosted by Canada on Thursday in London, UK, in which members of the International Coordination and Response Group are set to lay out their next steps for pushing for credible answers and access to black box data. We don't need black box data. We watched the missile hit the plane on a Twitter video. I mean, it would be nice to have the black box data, but I think that, and I fear that, we would probably be in a situation where the black box data says, oh yeah, there was a little hiccup there and there's no data there. Or whatever, right? I have a feeling that it's going to be inconclusive. I think that's the word they like to use. So, realistically, and from what I've read, they've bulldozed the site. So, all of this is window dressing. All of this is the leader saying, I hope that these are the situations. Back to the article. Trudeau said the goal of the meeting would be looking at ways to demand justice. Trudeau has faced repeated questions over the past week on whether he believes U.S. President Donald Trump also bears some responsibility for the incident, given that it came just hours after missile strikes by Iran were launched in response to his targeting and killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani on January 3rd. Iran initially denied shooting down the Ukrainian aircraft just moments after takeoff from Tehran's International Airport on January 7th, 2020. Officials admitted doing so days later after Trudeau gave a press conference saying Canada and its allies had intelligence suggesting Iran Iran had fired the missile. Iran said its military mistook the aircraft for an incoming hostile target. Soleimani was Iran's second in command and the architect of its campaign to expand influence across the Middle East. Sorry, just going back to this, the military target, 7 other airliners took off at that same time. And you would think that they would close the air traffic of the public airport if they were expecting or to carrying out military action, right? So as to avoid something like this. It stinks. This answer is not a good answer from Iran, okay? Just making sure everybody understands that. That's what I think about that. Back to the article. His death immediately sparked protests in Iran and Iraq against the United States, but within days, those protests took aim at the Iranian government for downing the aircraft. Of the victims killed in the resulting crash, more than 80 were Iranian. Those protests are calling for accountability, but police in Iran have reportedly begun using live ammunition and tear gas to break them up. So, to put this in context, what would happen if our government initiated military action, shot down a passenger jet, like a commercial passenger jet, and then said, no, that didn't happen, and anybody saying that it did happen is lying and spreading a psyop misinformation, which is what Iran was saying the day that this happened. Anything against Iran is a psyop misinformation. And then they had to come out and say, oh yeah, well, we did that. It was a mistake. Mea culpa, right? Oh, sorry about that, everybody. We're grieving with you. No, it's not believable because of your actions. It's not believable, right? So, and then when the protests turn against the leader of the country, right? Imagine if Justin Trudeau had done this, had overseen a military action that had downed a commercial jet. Would you expect him to step down? I think probably yes, right? And in response to that, Iran's police have begun using live ammunition and tear gas to break up protesters. Wow, right? Like, what an unbelievable turn of events, right? And I don't think that that's too big an ask. You know, hey man, your military shot down a commercial airline with innocent civilians on board, presumably, saying, whoops, sorry about that, and then shooting protesters. Not good enough. You need to step down. Back to the article. Trudeau referenced what he describes as the hurt and frustration of victims' families in Iran and said the protests should be heeded very carefully by the Iranian government. He also said he spoke with Trump about the incident. Quote, I've spoken to him and I've talked to him about the need to de-escalate tensions, he said. I've talked about the tremendous grief and loss that Canadians are feeling and the need for clear answers on how this happened and how we're going to make sure it never happens again. You know what I find notable? He doesn't say, I will speak to Mr. Khomeini right now. You need to de-escalate. You need to calm down. You need to listen to the international community. Everybody's telling Trump to calm down. Trump's the only one here doing the thing that should have been done in the 1930s in my comparison off the top. He's the only one standing up for the West, the only one saying this far and no farther. You will not have a nuclear weapon. Everybody else is saying, calm down, man. It's not that bad. It's that bad. It's worse than you think. It's way worse than you think. Back to the article. But he said to focus on him, and the Canadian government right now remains on the focus for him, and the Canadian government right now remains on victims, even as it could be weeks, perhaps even months. That's expectation managing before the victims are repatriated for burial. The grief they're going through is not to be consoled right now. They want answers. They've expressed anger and outrage and also immeasurable pain. I'm hurt like all Canadians. I'm angry like all Canadians. But unlike many people, I have a job to do that will be able to help these families directly. Getting answers for them is my entire focus right now. Okay, so that's Trudeau. A couple of times backhandedly blames Trump. A couple of times directly appeals to Trump to calm down and everybody's got to remain reasonable. De-escalation, de-escalation, de-escalation. Not once did he talk to Khomeini or any of the Iranian leadership saying back down, calm down. Not the foreign minister, not that I've seen anyway. There's no tweet saying Canada calls for Iran to listen and abide by the rules being set out by the United States and the international communities with regard to uranium enrichment, etc. because of your history of violence. None of that. None of that. And there should be that. There should be. This is ridiculous. So here's a history of Iranian attacks on Americans. Link is in the description if you want to read it. I am going to go through it. 1979 to 1981, hostages held at U.S. Embassy in Iran. 1983, suicide bombings in Lebanon. 1988, mine attack in the Persian Gulf. 1996, truck bombing in Saudi Arabia. 2001, 2000, 2001, support for the 9/11 hijackers. 2003 to 2011, deadly Iranian influence in Iran. I'm going to read this one because it's important. Iranian-backed Shiite militias in Iraq killed hundreds of U.S. service members and civilians. Iran provided training and material support for repeated attacks on U.S. personnel with conventional weapons and missiles, as well as sophisticated, improvised explosive devices, IEDs, and explosively formed projectiles, EFPs. Okay, just that should have been stopped. Just that should have garnered a response from the U.S. military. But if you've watched any of the, there's movies that portray the military policies of basically non-engagement. Basically, if you get shot at, run away. And there were movies that were highlighting this in the early 2010s, right? 2013, 2014. It was, I think Brad Pitt played one of the generals. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up, but it doesn't really matter. The policy was not to respond, basically. Like, if you kill them, they win, I think is the quote. Yeah. So it's like, we're so aggressive and violent that we're teaching them to be aggressive and violent. Let's just give them money, basically, was the Iraq policy. But it got a bunch of U.S. service people killed. Is that what you send a military to a foreign country to have happen? Is that the point? Is that the purpose? Because that's what was happening. It just seems crazy. And now Trump is responding. If you kill an American, I will respond. And he said, maybe disproportionately, maybe. So, and Trump is using the crazy man thing that Truman used, right? Truman famously used the wild man with a nuke on his finger on the button. I'll nuke you. And he threatened Russia a bunch. Like, I'm going to nuke you, man. Don't do it. I'm going to nuke you. So Trump is using that bravado and has not followed through. And it's interesting. It's interesting to watch. Back to the list of Iranian attacks on Americans. And we're going to look at modern aggression too in the last year. Okay. So unjustly detaining Americans, that's 2007 to present. Assassination attempt in Washington, D.C., 2011, 2012 and 13, attack on U.S. interests in Africa, 2015 to present, harassment in the Persian Gulf, 2017, Hezbollah plots attacks in the United States, 2018, agents of Iran in the United States, and 2018, Iranian proxies target U.S. diplomats. And each of those are interesting to read. I don't have links to back each of those up, but each one of them is, I've independently looked at a couple and they bore out, right? Here's the New York Times. Trump designates, and I'm going to go back, this is 2018, April 2018, just to show you that the tensions have been at least a year old, if not 30 years old, right? Like, we're not talking about recent tensions, Justin Trudeau. These tensions have been bubbling for decades, and nobody's done anything. And the reason that we're seeing movement is because Trump is ready to make a deal, and he will make them ready to make a deal, whether they like it or not. And I don't know if that's good or bad. That's just what's happening. Look at the world, right? So here's the New York Times. It says Trump designates Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a foreign terrorist group. And that was April 8th, 2019. Here is May 11th, 2019. This is The Economist. And it says, as America and Iran act tough, the risk of conflict is growing. So this is May 11th. This is almost a year ago. The worst deal ever negotiated was President Donald Trump's view of Barack Obama's signature diplomatic achievement, a deal that placed strict limits on Iran's nuclear program in return for sanctions relief. The agreement, signed in 2015 by Iran and 6 world powers, clumsily named the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, made it much harder for Iran to build an atomic bomb, at least for a while. But it has been on life support ever since Mr. Trump declared a year ago that he was withdrawing from it. On May 8th, Hassan Rouhani, Iran's president, pushed it closer to death. Mr. Rouhani said that Iran would stop complying with parts of the deal and warned that more breaches might follow. His announcement had an ominous backdrop. On May 5th, America sent an aircraft carrier strike group and bombers to the Middle East in response to, quote, troubling and escalatory indications and warnings of Iranian aggression. 2 days later, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, unexpectedly turned up in Iraq, where America has long accused of Iran of sponsoring attacks on American forces, right? The U.S. base, Iraqi base that was attacked by Iran. Here's NBC News, and this is on June 25th, 2019. It says Iran to abandon more nuclear deal commitments after slamming U.S. sanctions. And I just want to show you. It says the U.S. measures were in part a response to Iran shooting down a U.S. surveillance drone that it said entered its airspace. The U.S. says it was flying in international airspace. And there was one more part on this. Oh, maybe not. Okay. Even so, I'm just underlining that Iran is openly abandoning even the 2015 nuclear deal. They're not willing to abide by that. They're not willing to play ball. They're just going to be aggressive. And here's another one. Washington Post is reporting U.S. blames Iran for attack on oil tankers, releases video purporting to show Iranians removing mine. And this is the Strait of Hormuz, right? This is where between Oman and Iran. Okay. And here is the Wall Street Journal, an opinion piece, but it says this is behind Iran's new aggressiveness. This was printed on July 2nd, 2019, 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Tehran announced Monday it had breached the uranium enrichment limits of the 2015 nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a week after shooting down a U.S. drone. What prompted Iran's new aggressiveness and what does it seek to achieve? Its policy combines two components, non-compliance with aspects of the JCPOA and so-called gray zone activities such as unconventional attacks through proxies, sabotage of tankers and oil pipelines, and the attack on the drone. The common view is that Iran's goal is to pressure the U.S. to relieve economic sanctions. While this view is not entirely wrong, it misses Tehran's most urgent priority. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, is provoking a crisis to imbue European leaders with fear of war and economic disruption so that they will lobby the U.S. to give Iran what it wants. Mr. Khamenei timed the pressure campaign so that the European lobbying would begin at the Group of 20 summit in Osaka, Japan last weekend. Specifically, Mr. Khamenei wants 7 waivers by August 1st. They pertain not to banking and the sale of oil, that is economic sanctions, but instead to Iran's international partnerships at its nuclear sites. And here's the LA Times. What's behind Iran's actions on the Strait of Hormuz? And I thought I'd highlighted this. Hold on. This is just a backgrounder on why the Strait of Hormuz is important and what's been going on there with regards to Iranian aggression. And I'll just read this part. It says, the seizure of a British oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the latest example of how tensions between the U.S. and Iran have spilled onto the world's most strategic and vital waterways for oil. Since May, Iran has been accused of harassing and attacking oil tankers in the Strait. As the British government continues to investigate Friday's seizure, experts worry that it raises the potential of a military clash. However, they also say it offers a lens into Iran's strategy towards the U.S. Donald Trump didn't respond to any of this, right? Didn't respond in a way that was disproportionate, just basically released the video, allowed the thing to play out the way it was going to play out. So having a plan to directly attack the United States, Donald Trump responded to, right? This is just released audio, reveals Iranian aggression in the Strait. I'm not going to read this because we're just about done. I want to make the point that I was trying to make at the beginning. So September 30th, 1938, Hitler appeased at Munich, and this is the History Channel. I'm just going to read this because it applies to now. On this day in 1938, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, French Premier Edouard Daladier, and British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain signed the Munich Pact, which seals the fate of Czechoslovakia, virtually handing it over to Germany in the name of peace. Upon return to Britain, Chamberlain would declare that the meeting had achieved peace in our time. Although the agreement was given into Hitler's hands only the Sunderlands, that part of Czechoslovakia where 3 million ethnic Germans lived, it also handed over to the Nazi war machine 66% of Czechoslovakia's coal, 70% of its iron and steel, 70% of its electrical power. It also left the Czech nation open to complete domination by Germany. In short, the Munich Pact sacrificed the autonomy of Czechoslovakia on the altar of short-term peace. Very short term. The terrorized Czech government was eventually forced to surrender the western provinces of Bohemia and Moravia, which became a protectorate of Germany, and finally Slovakia and the Carpathian Ukraine. In each of these partition regions, Germany set up puppet pro-Nazi regimes that served the military and political ends of Adolf Hitler. By the time of the invasion of Poland in September 1939, the nation called Czechoslovakia no longer existed. It was Neville Chamberlain who would be best remembered as the champion of the Munich Pact, having met privately with Hitler at Berchtesgaden, excuse me if I've got that wrong, the dictator's mountaintop retreat. Before the Munich conference, Chamberlain, convinced that Hitler's territorial demands were not unreasonable and that Hitler was a gentleman, persuaded the French to join him in pressuring Czechoslovakia to submit to the Führer's demands. Upon Hitler's invasion of Poland a year later, Chamberlain was put in the embarrassing situation of announcing that a state of war existed between Germany and Britain. By the time Hitler occupied Norway and Denmark, Chamberlain was finished as a credible leader. And the reason I wanted to say all of that is because appeasement didn't work then. It didn't work in 2003 to 2011, where attack after attack after attack happened. And what did the US military do? Handed out money and changed tactics, but fundamentally didn't do anything to engage with the terrorists or the attackers or anything to that effect. And appeasement won't work now. So having the idea that Mr. Trudeau could calm down the United States and talk him down, it's not the United States you need to be addressing. It's not Donald Trump you need to be talking to. It's the supreme leader, Khomeini, and the president, Rouhani, that you need to address with your demands. If you want a peaceful world, then, well, I mean, asking a dictator nicely is not the way to go about it, I think. That's it for me today. Thanks for watching. Check out CanadaPoly.com and CanadaReport.co. And have a wonderful, wonderful